It was just an ordinary day or so, I thought. After finishing work earlier than usual, I decided to go for a run. I didn't want to waste the nice weather, and getting some fresh air sounded like the perfect way to unwind. My usual jogging route crossed several busy roads, and I wasn't in the mood to keep stopping every few minutes for traffic. So, I chose a quieter path this time along the canal and through the woods, a peaceful area I knew well. It was a bit more secluded, but I liked the idea of having the path to myself. The first few kilometers were refreshing. I focused on my pace, enjoying the cool breeze and the quiet sounds of nature around me. But as I got deeper into the route, things started to feel a little different. The air felt heavier, the silence more unsettling. 6 kilometers in, I reached a long, straight path along the canal. On my left, the calm water reflected the fading light. To my right was wasteland, an abandoned area where old factories used to stand. Most of the buildings had been demolished, but a few crumbling structures and twisted pieces of metal still remained, overgrown with weeds and wild plants. I kept my pace steady, but as I passed by one of the remaining factory walls, I noticed a man sitting on top of a low brick wall, his legs dangling over the side. He looked rough, messy clothes, unshaven, like someone who had been on the streets for a while. The moment he saw me, he jumped to his feet and shouted something. I couldn't make out his words at first, but he seemed eager to get my attention. I wasn't sure what to do, but before I could think it through, I found myself slowing down. As I got closer, he called out, "Wait there. Can you help me find my phone?" His voice had a strange tone, friendly, but also desperate. He started coming down the old metal stairs attached to the factory wall, moving quickly as if he didn't want me to leave. A fence separated us, but we stood just a few feet apart. He looked straight at me, a hopeful expression on his face, and asked again, "Can you help me find my phone? I dropped it around here somewhere. Can you ring my number for me?" There was something about the way he asked that made me uneasy. His voice sounded off, and I couldn't shake the strange feeling creeping over me. But I didn't want to seem rude. My phone was strapped to my arm, so I told him, "Sure, just give me the number." As I unlocked my phone, he rattled off a series of numbers, but he said them too fast, and something about the way he spoke made me feel even more suspicious. The numbers didn't sound right, either. They didn't start with the usual digits, which felt odd for a phone number. At that moment, I knew something wasn't right. But I wasn't scared yet. I'm in good shape, taller and stronger than the man in front of me. And with the fence between us, I figured I could handle the situation if it turned bad. Still, I made sure to keep my distance, keeping my eye on his hands, just in case. He quickly gave me another number, this time starting with the correct digits, but I could tell something strange was going on. Then, out of nowhere, another man appeared from behind the wall, a much larger man. His clothes were dirty, and his eyes were wild, like someone high on drugs. He joined the first man, pretending to listen for the phone ringing. "I think I hear it over here," the bigger man said, waving me over toward a gap in the fence. "Come through here, it's closer." That's when my heart started racing. Something was definitely wrong. They kept insisting the phone was ringing and tried to convince me to come closer. But I knew I hadn't even finished dialing the number. The first man was acting frustrated now, pacing around, muttering under his breath. Then I heard him say something under his breath, not loud, but clear enough in the quiet surroundings. "He's not going to fall for it." The moment those words hit my ears, it felt like everything around me slowed down. The path stretched out in front of me, quiet and lonely, with no one else in sight. The only sounds were the steady thud of my footsteps and the gentle splash of the canal water beside me. I focused on keeping my rhythm, telling myself that this was just another ordinary run. But the further I went, the more isolated the area felt. To my left, the canal looked calm, but the wasteland on my right gave off an uneasy vibe. Old, broken-down factories stood like ghosts from another time, surrounded by tangled weeds and scattered debris. I tried to shake off the eerie feeling creeping in. I knew this route well, or at least I thought I did. But somehow, everything felt different today, as if the quiet had teeth waiting to bite. I kept running, telling myself not to overthink it. It's just an empty path, nothing to worry about. I pushed forward, determined to finish the route. As I kept running, I saw someone up ahead. A man was sitting on the edge of a crumbling wall, his legs hanging down casually. He looked rough, like he hadn't showered in days, with worn-out clothes and an unkempt beard. The moment he noticed me, he jumped to his feet, moving fast, as if waiting for me to get closer. He called out, "Hey, can you help me?" His voice carried a strange mix of urgency and friendliness. I slowed down slightly, unsure whether to stop or keep going. Something about the way he watched me made me uneasy, but I told myself it was probably nothing. As I approached, he said, "I lost my phone around here. Can you call it for me?" There was a fence between us, but now I was standing only a few feet away from him. I could see him better. His face looked tired, and he seemed on edge, but not threatening. Still, I didn't like the situation. Something about the way he stared at me felt off, like he was measuring my reaction. I hesitated, but I didn't want to seem rude, so I told him I'd try calling the number. I pulled my phone from the strap on my arm and asked him to give me the number. He rattled off a series of numbers too quickly for me to keep up. I asked him to repeat it, and this time he gave a number that sounded more normal. But something still didn't sit right with me. The way he spoke, the way his eyes darted around, it felt wrong. Before I could finish dialing, he interrupted, saying, "It must be over there, come help me find it." He pointed toward a spot past the fence, urging me to cross through a gap. I stayed put, pretending to keep dialing. My instinct screamed that this wasn't about a lost phone. The way he kept insisting, the strange eagerness in his voice, it all felt like a trap. That's when the second man appeared, larger and even more disheveled, moving toward the same gap. His wild eyes locked on me, and he grinned like he knew something I didn't. "Yeah, it's ringing, come on," he said, waving me over. Everything in me told me to stay exactly where I was. As they kept urging me to come closer, it became clear this wasn't about a lost phone. Their words felt rehearsed, like they had done this before. The larger man kept glancing toward the gap in the fence, as if waiting for me to make a move. I stayed where I was, pretending to dial, but inside, I was calculating my next step. Then I caught something, just a quick whisper from the first man. "He's not going to fall for it." That's when my heart sank. Whatever their plan was, it wasn't good. I glanced at the gap again and realized the second man was edging closer to it, ready to block my way if I got too close. My breathing grew shallow, and I knew if I didn't act now, I might not get another chance. I looked around, found the clearest path back, and tightened my grip on my phone. It was time to run. Without a second thought, I turned and sprinted as fast as I could. The air felt heavy, and my heartbeat pounded in my ears. I didn't look back right away. I needed every ounce of focus to put distance between me and those men. My legs burned, but I pushed harder, knowing I couldn't afford to slow down. After about 20 seconds, I risked a glance over my shoulder. They weren't chasing me. Instead, they stood near the gap in the fence, just watching. Their silence made my skin crawl. If they really needed help, they would have called after me or tried to explain. But they didn't. They just stood there, staring, like predators who had lost their prey. I kept running, not trusting the quiet behind me. Each step felt like a small victory, but I didn't stop until I was far from the canal path, back where there were people and lights. Once I reached a safe spot on the main road, I stopped to catch my breath and called the police. My hands were shaking as I gave them the details. 2 men by the canal, acting suspicious, trying to lure me through a fence. The officer on the phone asked a few questions but didn't seem too concerned. "We'll look into it," they said, as if it was just another routine call. I hung up, feeling both frustrated and relieved. The threat was over, but I knew the situation could have ended very differently. The unsettling thought gnawed at me. What if they try this on someone else? What if the next person isn't as lucky? I promised myself I wouldn't run that route again, not alone. It all seemed perfect at first. 4 friends, living together in a house off campus, ready for a new chapter. It was supposed to be a place filled with fun, parties, and late-night laughs. But soon, the excitement started to fade. Strange things began happening, small at first, but enough to get under their skin. At night, the house didn't feel so lively anymore. Almost every night, they heard noises outside, soft footsteps crunching across gravel, faint creaks and taps, like someone walking along the walls just outside their windows. At first, they brushed it off, thinking it might be animals or just their imagination. But as the sounds became more frequent, it became harder to ignore. The air around the house felt heavy, like they were being watched, and the girls knew one thing for sure: something was off. At first, the house seemed like a dream. It was spacious, affordable, and just far enough from campus to feel private. The 4 friends moved in without a second thought, excited for the freedom. But as the days passed, the energy in the house shifted. It started late at night, soft steps outside, as if someone was walking slowly around the house. The sounds always came after dark, just when the girls were settling in. Each time they tried to figure out what it was, they found nothing. No people, no animals, just silence. But the noises kept coming, and with each night, the uneasy feeling grew stronger. They knew it wasn't in their heads. Something, or someone, was out there. It wasn't long before strange noises turned into unsettling events. One evening, one of the girls was home alone, blasting music while the others were out. In the middle of a song, she heard a loud noise coming from downstairs. She paused for a moment, listening. When she went to check, she found the garage door wide open, even though they never used it. She felt a chill run down her spine as she walked through the house. The back door was unlocked, something none of them ever did. She checked every room, expecting to find someone or something, but nothing was missing. It felt like a warning, as if someone had been there and decided not to take anything. This time, weeks later, they decided to throw a Halloween party, hoping to shake off the strange feeling that had settled over the house. Laughter filled the rooms, and for a while, everything felt normal again. But just after midnight, one of the girls stepped outside for some air. That's when she saw him, a man, walking slowly along the side of the house. Their eyes met for a brief second. The man froze, then turned and bolted up the hill behind the house, disappearing into the dark. Shaken, she ran inside to warn the others. They tried to laugh it off, blaming the creepy atmosphere of Halloween, but deep down, they all knew this wasn't part of the fun. Someone had been watching them. Not long after the party, things took another unsettling turn. One morning, they found one of their car windows shattered. At first, they thought it might have been a random act of vandalism, but nothing had been taken. No valuables were missing, and the door was still locked. It made no sense. The broken window felt deliberate, like someone wanted to send a message. They started to wonder if the man from the backyard had something to do with it. The sense of unease around the house deepened. This wasn't just a prank. Someone was watching, waiting, and now they were making their presence known. One night, while driving through the neighborhood, they noticed a car trailing behind them. At first, they thought it was just a coincidence, but the car stayed too close, following every turn they made. Unease grew as they tried to lose it, but no matter which way they went, the car seemed to reappear. Finally, they managed to slip out of sight and pull over a block away. As they caught their breath, the same car appeared again, this time parked outside a house not far from theirs. The driver sat still, watching, as if waiting for something. They recognized the car immediately, an old white sedan with a black scuff on the bumper. It had been circling their house before, and now it was back, parked in the perfect spot to keep an eye on them. The sightings didn't stop there. On several occasions, they saw the same man, the one from the white sedan, lurking near their house. Sometimes he stood in the neighbor's window, staring across at them. Other times, they spotted him sitting on a porch, silently watching their home. His tattoo-covered arms and cold gaze gave them chills every time. They tried convincing themselves it was just a strange coincidence, but deep down, they knew it wasn't. The way he appeared without reason, always at odd hours, felt intentional. Each sighting added to their growing fear, and they realized this man wasn't just passing through. He was waiting, watching, and they had no idea what for. The final confirmation came one cold morning after a night of snowfall. As they stepped outside, they noticed a trail of footprints leading from the neighbor's yard right up to their fence. The prints didn't stop there. They continued under one housemate's window and circled back toward the gate. The path matched exactly with the strange noises they had been hearing for weeks. What made it worse was how precise the prints were. It wasn't a random wander through the yard. The person knew exactly where to walk. They followed the path back toward the neighbor's property, but it ended just before the gate. That was when the fear fully set in. Someone had been sneaking around their house, watching them while they slept. And now they had proof it wasn't just in their heads. The man had been there, right under their windows, and no one knew when or if he would come back. Story 3. It was Halloween night, and the house felt unusually quiet. Our parents had gone to a party, leaving me and my little brother behind. They told us we were too old to go trick or treating, which didn't sit well with either of us. We had made plans with friends, but they fell apart when no one wanted to stay in. Everyone else was out collecting candy. So there we were, sitting at home, stuck with the job of handing out sweets to the kids who came knocking. The first part of the night went by fast. Groups of children in costumes, bags full of candy, and the usual Halloween fun. But with each hour that passed, fewer people came to the door, and the excitement started to wear off. The streets outside grew quieter, and soon it was just me, my brother, and the leftover candy. We thought the night was over, but we couldn't have been more wrong. The house felt strange without our parents around. Every small sound seemed louder, and the silence between us grew heavier as the night went on. We tried to distract ourselves by watching a scary movie, but it didn't help. The fact that we couldn't join our friends made it worse. We felt stuck, bored, and restless. We finished handing out most of the candy by 10 p.m. With only a little left, we decided to keep it for ourselves. The porch light was off, and the decorations were packed away, signaling we were done for the night. But even though it seemed like everything had settled down, we both had an odd feeling. Something didn't feel right, and it was just the beginning. We had just settled on the couch, thinking the night was finally over, when a knock echoed through the house. It was strange no one should be knocking this late, especially with the porch light off. For a moment, we sat frozen, listening, hoping maybe it was just our parents coming back early. But something about the timing felt off. I stood up, my brother right behind me, and we both hesitated by the door. Whoever it was, they didn't knock again right away. There was a pause, long enough to make us uneasy. It wasn't just a simple knock, it felt deliberate, like whoever was outside knew exactly what they were doing. And with each second of silence that followed, the tension in the air grew thicker. Through the peephole, I saw a man standing on the porch. He wore a black hoodie with the hood pulled low, making it hard to see his face clearly. What little I could see was unsettling. His beard looked scruffy, and his lips were cracked and dry. Something about him didn't seem right. He looked too old to be out trick-or-treating and wasn't wearing a costume. He stood there, shifting slightly, as if nervous or cold. But the night wasn't cold at all, which only made him seem stranger. My brother whispered from behind, asking if it was one of our parents. I shook my head. Whoever this man was, he didn't belong here. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach, and I knew opening the door was not an option. As I kept watching through the peephole, the man knocked again, this time a little harder. I called out, telling him we were out of candy, hoping that would make him leave. Instead of walking away, a slow, unsettling smile spread across his face. Then, in a low, raspy voice, he asked, "Are you alone in there?" My heart skipped a beat. There was something in his tone mocking, as if he already knew the answer. My brother whispered behind me, "Should we call the police?" I put a hand up to quiet him, but it was too late. The man's smile widened, and he said softly, "Sounds like you're not alone after all." That was when the fear truly set in. This man wasn't here for candy. The tension in the air grew thicker as the man stood silently on the porch, his hands stuffed deep into the front pocket of his hoodie. He didn't leave, and the way he stared at the door felt like a challenge. I couldn't see what he was holding, but the thought of him being armed crossed my mind. I took a deep breath and shouted, "Get away from here, or we're calling the police." My voice was sharp and loud, hoping it would scare him off. For a moment, his expression darkened, and his crooked smile faded. Then he bared his yellow teeth, anger flashing across his face. He grumbled something under his breath, gave the door one last look, and slowly stepped back, disappearing into the night. Even though he was gone, the uneasy feeling stayed. I kept my eye pressed to the peephole, watching until I saw him walk completely off our property. My brother and I stood there for a moment, frozen, unsure if he was really gone or just hiding somewhere nearby. We talked quietly, debating whether to call the police. In the end, we decided against it. Nothing serious had happened, and we convinced ourselves that he was probably just a harmless drifter. But deep down, neither of us believed that. Something about the way he acted didn't feel random. It felt deliberate, like he was searching for something or someone. The next morning, we woke up to terrible news. An elderly woman who lived just a few houses down had been found dead on her front porch. She had been stabbed multiple times in the chest and neck. Her neighbor discovered her body early in the morning, and the front door to her house had been left wide open. My brother and I exchanged a look, the same sickening thought hitting both of us at once. We knew who had done it, the man from our porch. We told the police everything we could remember, but without a clear view of his face, there wasn't much they could do. The man was gone, and the only thing he left behind was the chilling realization that he hadn't wanted to steal anything. He was there for one reason, only to kill. The weight of what happened stayed with us long after that night. We kept thinking about how close we had been to stopping him. If we had called the police right away, maybe that poor woman would still be alive. But instead, we had waited, hoping the situation would just go away. Every time we replayed the events in our minds, the regret grew deeper. The fact that the man didn't steal anything from her house only made it worse. He wasn't looking for money or valuables, he only wanted to kill. And knowing that he had stood on our porch, just feet away from us, was something we couldn't shake. The fear lingered, and so did the guilt. We had survived, but it didn't feel like we had escaped. It was Halloween evening, and we had just finished a long day at the antique shop. The store, housed in an old 5-story building, felt eerie once the sun went down. Shadows stretched across the dusty floors, and the silence grew heavier as the last customers left. My husband and I decided to close early and head out for dinner across town. We locked the heavy front doors, double-checked the gates that separated each floor, and set the alarm. The old building always had a way of making us uneasy at night, but we were used to it. With everything locked up, we left the building behind, hoping to enjoy a peaceful evening. Little did we know, the night was far from over. The building felt even more unsettling after dark, with its narrow hallways and old furniture casting strange shapes on the walls. Each floor had its own atmosphere, filled with forgotten things that seemed to come alive in the quiet. We had done this routine 100 times, but Halloween always made it feel different, like the store was holding its breath. After locking the place up, we stepped outside and took one last look at the building. Everything seemed secure. We weren't worried. It was just another night, and all we wanted was a quiet dinner away from the store. But something about the way the shadows clung to the windows as we left gave me a strange sense of unease. I shook it off, not realizing how quickly that feeling would return. Just as we were halfway through dinner, my phone buzzed. It was the security company. They told us the motion detector on the lower floor had been triggered. At first, it didn't seem like a big deal. We figured it could be a bird or maybe something falling off a shelf, small stuff that sometimes set off the alarm. Still, we couldn't shake the feeling that something might be off. We talked it over, trying to convince ourselves it was nothing. But in the end, we decided it was better to be safe than sorry. We paid the bill and headed back to the shop, hoping it was just a false alarm. But something deep down told me we weren't going back to an empty building. When we arrived, the building stood quiet and still, just as we had left it. My husband checked the outside for any signs of a break-in while I unlocked the front gate. Everything looked normal, no broken windows, no forced doors. I stepped inside, the air heavy with the smell of old wood and dust. The dim light from my phone barely cut through the darkness. I moved through the main floor slowly, listening for any sound that might explain the alarm. My husband joined me a moment later. Shaking his head, he hadn't found anything outside. We both tried to convince ourselves it was just a mistake, maybe a faulty sensor or something harmless. But as we made our way deeper into the building, the uneasy feeling crept back. Something felt wrong, and it was only a matter of time before we found out why. As we reached the lower floor, something caught my eye. In the middle of the room, sitting out in the open, were bolt cutters and a fire extinguisher. They hadn't been there when we closed earlier. My stomach tightened. These weren't things someone just leaves lying around. I froze, and a wave of fear washed over me. Someone had been here. These weren't random objects, they were tools meant to break in. The worst part, there were no signs of forced entry anywhere. meaning whoever brought them could still be inside. I whispered to my husband, pointing toward the items. He went pale. The quiet around us suddenly felt much heavier, as if the building itself was waiting for us to make the next move. We rushed to the office to check the security cameras, hoping to make sense of what was happening. As the footage played, my heart sank. There he was, a man, crouched behind a bookcase, waiting silently as we locked up earlier that evening. He had been inside the entire time, watching us close the store. The video showed him moving calmly through the building, as if he knew exactly where to go. At one point, he grabbed items from a display and crafted a mask out of fake flowers, pulling it over his face with eerie precision. He walked the halls, unbothered, as though the store belonged to him. It wasn't just the way he moved, it was the timing. He only started preparing once we were gone, like he had all night to do whatever he wanted. My skin crawled as the footage ended. He was somewhere in this building, and we still didn't know where. We kept watching the footage, trying to track his movements. Eventually, the cameras showed him heading toward the basement. There, he found a narrow gap above an old iron gate and slipped through it with unsettling ease. On the other side was a dirt tunnel that ran under the building, something we rarely thought about. The tunnel connected to the basement of a nearby restaurant, offering a hidden way out. He moved through it as if he knew the path well, not hesitating even once. The thought of him crawling through that dark, filthy space made my skin crawl. We knew that if he reached the other side, he could walk right into the restaurant and disappear without anyone noticing. We called the police, and they searched the building from top to bottom, but the man was gone. They checked the tunnel leading to the restaurant, expecting to find footprints or some sign of his escape. But there was nothing, no tracks, no mud, no trace that anyone had passed through. Even the restaurant staff hadn't noticed anything unusual. There were no signs on their cameras, no muddy footprints in the kitchen. It was as if the man had vanished into thin air. The officers were just as puzzled as we were. With no solid leads, they could do little more than advise us to keep the tunnel sealed. But even after boarding it up, the uneasy feeling didn't go away. Even after we sealed the tunnel and months went by without any incident, the fear never really left us. Every time we locked up the store, I found myself glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows. It didn't help that the security footage never gave us any answers. We couldn't stop thinking, how did he get in? And where did he go? The building still felt off, like it held a secret we hadn't uncovered yet. No matter how much time passed, the thought lingered. Was he really gone? Or was he just waiting for the right moment to come back? The night felt heavier than usual, the kind of night where every little sound seems louder. Our parents had left for a Halloween party, leaving me and my brother home alone. We were supposed to hand out candy to the trick-or-treaters, but something about the night felt off. We tried to keep things fun, watching scary movies and munching on candy, but it wasn't working. Even though we were inside, safe with the doors locked, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking just out of sight. My brother laughed it off, saying I was just being paranoid. But deep down, I knew that tonight was going to be different from all the others. We had done Halloween at home before, but this time felt strange. The streets outside were quieter than usual, and fewer kids came by for candy. We gave out what we had until the bucket was almost empty, hoping the night would end soon. Every little creak in the house made me more nervous, but I kept brushing it off. My brother teased me for being jumpy, but I could tell he felt it too. There was something unsettling about the silence outside. It was the kind of quiet that made you feel like something was waiting, just out of sight, ready to make its move. Just as we started to relax, There was a knock at the door. It was late, way past the time when trick-or-treaters usually stopped by. My brother and I exchanged a quick glance, both of us feeling uneasy. I walked to the door, hesitating for a moment before looking through the peephole. On the other side stood a man not in a costume, just plain clothes. His hood was pulled up, and he had a strange, nervous energy about him. Something wasn't right. Still, I figured maybe he was lost or confused. After a few tense moments, the man left without saying much, disappearing into the night. But the knot in my stomach didn't go away. Just when we thought the strange visitor was gone for good, the knock came again, louder this time. My brother tensed, and so did I. I peeked through the peephole once more, and there he was, the same man, standing closer to the door now, his hood still up, but his expression had changed. There was something unsettling about the way he stood, like he wasn't in a hurry to leave this time. He knocked again, harder, and shifted from foot to foot, as if growing impatient. My heart raced, and I whispered to my brother that it was the same guy. This time, I knew we weren't dealing with a harmless stranger passing by. Something was wrong. Through the door, the man's voice cut through the silence. "Let me in," he said, calm but insistent. My brother and I stayed frozen in place. Then he asked, "You sure it's safe in there?" His words felt like a warning, not a question, and they sent a chill through me. He leaned closer to the door, as if listening for something. "Are you alone?" he asked again, his tone darker this time. It was clear he wasn't leaving on his own. My brother whispered, "What does he want?" But I knew we weren't just dealing with someone lost or confused. The man was testing us, waiting to see if we'd give him the chance to get inside. I knew we had to act fast. My brother and I backed away from the door, but I shouted, trying to sound braver than I felt. "Leave now, or we're calling the police." The house fell silent for a moment, and I hoped he'd take the hint. Instead, the man slammed his hand against the door, rattling it in its frame. His breath was heavy, and I could hear the anger building. But after what felt like an eternity, he stepped back. Through the peephole, I saw his expression shift to something cold, almost lifeless. He glared at the door for a few seconds, then slowly turned and walked away. We stayed by the door, listening carefully for any sounds outside. Minutes passed, but everything stayed quiet. My brother let out a shaky breath, and I forced myself to believe it was over. Maybe he had finally given up and moved on. We sat back down, trying to calm our nerves. The house felt too quiet, but we told ourselves that the man was gone. We tried to focus on the movie again, hoping the worst was behind us. For a brief moment, it felt like the night might end without any more trouble. But the uneasy feeling in the pit of my stomach wouldn't let go. Deep down, I knew something still wasn't right. Just as we were starting to relax, I decided to check the house one more time, just to be sure. I walked toward the back, checking doors and windows. That's when I saw it, a window, halfway open. My heart sank. We never leave windows unlocked, especially not at night. Panic set in as I imagined the worst. Had the man tried to get in through here? Was he still nearby, waiting for another chance? I slammed the window shut and locked it, my hands shaking. I called my brother over, and the look on his face told me he was thinking the same thing. We hadn't just been lucky the man had tried, and we might have barely avoided something far worse. The next morning, we woke up to grim news. A house just a few streets over had been broken into during the night. The report said the intruder assaulted someone inside before fleeing. My stomach twisted as I realized what it meant. He hadn't left to move on. He had been looking for another way in, and when he couldn't get inside our house, he found another target. We told the police everything, hoping it might help, but the damage was already done. The man wasn't just after a chance to scare us, he had come with a purpose, and someone else had paid the price. The fear lingered, and the worst part was knowing how close we had come to being his victims.